Hi, and welcome to another episode of This Just In. I'm Marsha Boyce, and it's good to be back in this hot seat. Today, we're talking about women in sport. So, of course, I had to wrestle that mic away from Justin, especially for this one. Now, Justin is here, of course. Hi, Justin. And more importantly, though, we have a very special guest with us today, Rosheika Grant. Now, Rosheika is a communication specialist. She's from Jamaica. She's the producer of our good friends over at the Drive Phase podcast, as well as the executive producer of the Track and Field Exchange podcast. Now, she's currently pursuing a master's degree in sport management, politics, and international development at Loughborough University in the UK, where she focuses on safe sport, gender sensitive management, and sports marketing. Now, she is an avid sports fan, but unfortunately, she is a fan of English Premier League club
Not
Chelsea.
unfortunate at all.
For the purposes of this show,
You waited too long to
unfortunately,
bring on the most important point. Rosheika is indeed a Chelsea fan. Go ahead.
we will overlook that for today's episode. But Rosheika, welcome. Thanks for joining us here on this Just In.
Thanks, Marsha, for having me. Even though it's a sort of lukewarm welcome, I understand. No, you're going through a tough time being a Manchester United fan, so you have my prayers and thoughts.
No slander will be appreciated on this show.
Also,
Well, guys, today we're talking women in sport 2022 and beyond. A lot has been happening since the pandemic and as we try to transition out of the pandemic, which really had an impact on women's sport, in some cases, a negative impact on women's sport across the globe. However, we're seeing, especially at the professional and the international level, increases in certain areas like media coverage, in terms of spectatorship, and so forth. So we're going to start there today. We're going to jump right in at the top. Rosheika, as our guest, I'm going to put you in the spotlight first up. Now, tell me, first of all, do you think there is adequate media and broadcast coverage when it comes to women's sports?
Definitely not. Not even close. I did a paper a few months ago that spoke about different researches that have been done about media coverage of women, not just in America, but in Europe, etc. And in a 40-year span, it was stuck below 5%. So from in the 70s to the study was completed in 2018, we're still under 5%. So it's definitely not enough. There's so much more that can be done. But as in the last decade, well, especially the last 5 years, there have been a lot of digital moving towards using digital media, not relying on the big ESPN, TNT, ABC to market women's sports anymore. Basically, persons who are invested in women's sports have realized that they have to take it into their own hands and actually focus on getting the coverage out there one way or the other, because we cannot rely on traditional media, as research shows. So it's not enough, and there's so much more that can be done. But I think that there's a general effort there that I've seen in the last 5 years towards increasing the coverage.
Justin, what about you?
no, there's not enough, but it's easy for us to say that because, as you know, broadcasters are wanting back for their money. So it's easy for us that have no stake in it to say, yeah, women's sports are not broadcast, are not given enough television rights, are not given enough media coverage in general. But let's say, for instance, last season's WNBA finals, and you know, Marsha, I love my Mercury. As good as basketball is, and I think the WNBA product is probably one of the best basketball viewership products, only behind the NBA in my estimation. They only averaged, I think, about 840 something thousand odd viewers per game. When then you look and compare that to the NBA, which is obviously almost 9 and 10 per game, then you TV rights or broadcasters, ESPN are going to say we're not going to get back, what we put in terms of value for dollar. But to Rosheika's point, then you have to do or go past traditional media and find other means, whether it be YouTube TV, whether it be these, we've seen now Apple now getting into the market, especially with football. I think they've taken over Thursday night football, and I'm talking about American football here. You're going to have to look at other avenues until we find a way to make female sports, I don't know, I'm going to have to, more attractive for the viewers. And I don't know what that is, what that means. But the reality of the situation, unfortunately, no, there's not enough media coverage, but they will say that's because they're not getting bang for their buck.
And definitely for me, though, the situation is kind of a circle dependent on other things, because at the end of the day, if it isn't shown, you can't watch it, then the numbers can't increase, then you can't attract sponsors. So it is really a cycle that you have to jump in at some point to break that mold. And this goes for women's sport across the board. The point Rosheika mentioned about, other streaming platforms using over the top on different OTT platforms like The Season or Maikuju, etc. There's really a market where you're seeing more sporting organizations and federations and so forth, franchises, becoming streaming entities. So they, whether through their app or a different platform, they're putting their own coverage out there. And that's definitely where we will see things trending, because at the end of the day, there are only 24 hours in a broadcast cycle. So only so much can be shown on mainstream channels. But however, on digital platforms, you can create an additional channel for every offering that you want. There's no limit there. So definitely that's a trend we're going to see. And Justin, to your point though.
Sorry, I will say there are events though that I think get adequate coverage. Like you and I talk about this all the time, Marsha, like women's tennis. I really think there's no shortage of women's tennis on TV, and that's why we've come to know the Williams sisters. I know somebody like Naomi Osaka. She is arguably the biggest female face in all of sports all across media. So to be fair to them, like sports like women's tennis do get TV eyes. I know Rosheika's there itching to say something. And she's saying, I don't know.
What I would say to that point is you're right, but it leans back into the sexism in sports. Tennis is one of the first sports historically that women were encouraged to embrace because it's seen as feminine. And that is the problem with in terms of sports that women's sports has faced for all this time. I mean, Title IX is 50 years old this year. And though there are so many more women participating in sports, the media tends to be attracted to sports that are feminine. They may not say it, but in terms of framing, you see that's what happens. So yes, we get coverage of tennis because women are in tiny little skirts jumping up and down. It's sexy. Sex sells. That's what we've been told for so many years. But that leans back into the gender stereotypes, and women are not necessarily encouraged to play sports like basketball that we're only used to men being the stars of basketball, football, boxing, etc. And so that's why, as much as I said, it's a circle, but I don't usually lean on the fact that there is sufficient coverage for the feminine type sports, because that is again leaning into the gender stereotyping that happens with women in sports. To your point about the bang for buck, there will never be bang for buck if we never show it. So if persons don't have an opportunity to, if the audience never has an opportunity to consume it, then they will never be able to know that these athletes are really good. They are stars. This year, just seeing March Madness being put together with the women in the same place, it been marketed with the same fever that the men's part of March Madness got. We were able to see all these young women, men that don't normally, not just men, the audience that wouldn't normally consume college basketball in terms of the women, they were all watching because it's more available. So investment is not always about getting profit immediately. And if there are lots of all of these organizations on International Women's Day, they post these beautiful posters about women being the backbone of society, but you have to invest in them for them to be able to move up. There's a reason why so many athletes, basketball players, are traveling all over Europe in off season. They can't make money they don't make a living just playing in America, though they are champions, etc. So it's bang for buck, yes, but there's corporate social responsibility also takes in the fact that investment is critical to growing different sectors.
And just to then wrap up this particular thing, I find that oftentimes when we're talking about women's sport, we tend to compare it to men's sport. I mean, the WNBA was established in 1996. So in the grand scheme of
Yeah.
things, it is still a relatively young product. So it wouldn't be fair to compare it directly to the NBA. So the trend really should be seeing women's sport as disciplines in their own right, as a consideration, as opposed to just the female version of the better male version. And that's something we really need to get away from. And maybe, Justin, that's one of the reasons why tennis, you might see, because it is an individual sport,
Yeah.
you might tend to have lesser of that, direct comparison. You don't see it as simply just, oh, the female version of male
I always
sport.
wondered, but again, Marsha, I know Rosheika will find out. Unfortunately, I'm the worst person to ask these things because I just like sports in general. And I've always grown up, especially playing tennis, that when I was done, I've had female partners because I've played mixed doubles. So I'm not sure if you would remember, there's a girl named after the famous female tennis star, Tracy Austin. She was my doubles partner at Queen's College. So just accustomed to watching female tennis, or, it's just tennis. So I don't know if it is that WNBA is juxtaposed to the NBA, although I just did that in terms of looking at two
Oh, yeah.
numbers. But again, also working in media like all of us have, is like, it's easy for us to say like put in an investment, but now ESPN, as much as we talk about they're the worldwide leader, they now need, because of all the competition and now things like Apple now coming up, there's Fox Sports, all of this competition, they need immediate returns. And this is not to say the WNBA should not be readily televised or other sports, because I find it strange. Marsha, you and I talked about this the other day. Like, women's track and field is not packaged by itself; it's packaged with other stuff. Like, I find that a friend of mine, Ricky, was telling me that the Prefontaine Classic is coming up, and he showed me the men's 100-meter field. I told him I don't care, because all the drama now is towards the women's 100, because we know the situation between the Jamaicans and Americans, that huge rivalry.
But we're going to get to that in a bit. So I don't
Sorry.
want you to
Go ahead.
preempt that point. So just to wrap up this particular one too, just to consider that sometimes we also need to compare women's sport to itself as a metric of success. So for example, let's use the 2021 WNBA season as an example. Across 17 playoff games, they averaged about just over 350,000 viewers, but that was a 63% increase over just the previous season. So gaining a 63% increase in viewership in just one season, that is fantastic. So hopefully we will continue to see the trend. And the only thing that has changed is that there was more availability to actually see the games. So automatically viewership went up. So that then could be, the impetus for having more games on, because once the games are showing, then it gives people the opportunity to watch them. So then moving from broadcast, that brings us nicely into viewership and more specifically spectatorship. Now, research is showing that the various trends in spectatorship and expanding fan base in women's sport really increasing. So just to give you some numbers here, I'm going to look down at my paper. Starting with women's football, for example, in Europe, we're seeing more record-setting attendance numbers. So just on Friday, April 22nd, in Spain, over 90,000 fans watched Barcelona women versus Wolfsburg in their Champions League semifinals at the Nou Camp, breaking the attendance record that was set only, in March. The Euros, there's a general buzz as it relates to that. Already, all of the tickets for the final at Wembley in July have been sold out. We're talking about 87,000 tickets, and we don't even know which teams will be playing at this stage. So we're generally seeing that kind of trend in women's football in the US, and I'm talking soccer for those Americans who might be watching. Generally there's a greater trend for viewership numbers and attendance numbers specifically increasing. So my question first to you, Rosheika, then, do you think that the appetite, especially for women's football, is increasing?
Definitely. I'll use my Chelsea WhatsApp group as a case study here in terms of a few years ago, there are probably like two of us in the group that would be interested in a game that we're playing or that would know the names of these players. But these days, when we have big games, or not just big games, when we have games, you'll see someone asking for a stream or someone asking for the results. So if they're at work, and so there is an appetite for it. I think a big part of it, especially in Europe, has been that the clubs have made a concerted effort to include the women's sports, their women's football team, in all their marketing and PR material. So, like for example, Chelsea, we have a Chelsea Twitter, women's football Twitter, right? But they still post a lot of the results, the results, what the schedules, etc. Every week, we know that Chelsea women's have 3 games or 2 games this week. So, and you see that with Barcelona also. You see it across Europe, where there is a really strong effort in including it in all of their marketing material, and I think that's been a big part of it. And also creating stars of their players. A big part of what is not great in our side of the world in terms of women's sports is that we have these incredible players, but nobody knows how incredible they are because we're not talking about it. But if you look across the different platforms in Europe with the women's football, they're pushing out their stars, and even during international breaks, you'll see the Chelsea Twitter post that we had 2 goals from one player in international football. It has to be a real concerted effort, and they've really done so well with that. The other day I was trying to get a ticket to go to watch Chelsea at Leicester. Tickets were so low, and it was weeks before. Those are the things that we will see more of when we put more effort into marketing and pushing out, promoting the women's sports. So there is a growing appetite. I don't see it replicated as well in our part of the world, but I see that there is effort, but it has to be a long-term thing. We won't necessarily see the results immediately, but what I'm seeing now in terms of like Barcelona, etc., that didn't happen overnight. They started working on that so long before, and now we're seeing the results, and it's going to just keep growing. Those records are just going to be kept going because people are so interested now. And I mean, Barcelona is doing well in the men's side, so that kind of helps the women too, because there's some level of excellence there. And that's the thing, these women are so great, but a lot of people just don't know that they're great at football. So that's where they've done really well here, and I think that the appetite for it will grow once we're promoting it properly.
And definitely what we can't argue against then, for sure. Visibility seems to be the answer to a lot of the questions and queries and concerns we might have when it comes to women's sport, because that is how people become interested, that is how people become fans and so forth. And speaking of fans then, Justin, do you believe there is a true target market for some of these leagues, for example, the WNBA in the US?
That's the thing. The honest answer, I don't know. Because to Rosheika's point, right, in Europe, it is clear there is a push to market women's soccer particularly. Let us look now at the American side. Players like Megan Rapinoe and Hope Solo, and to mention others, they are more known. I don't know if it's because they're social justice movement, but they are more well known than their male counterparts. Yet,
even prior to that, the traditionally U.S. female soccer players have been more household names than the men's team.
Even if you go back as far as Mia Hamm, she is more known than any other male soccer player. But then when it doesn't show up when you look at their professional women's soccer league, and it's weird. I know Marsha will say that it just started, and yeah, it kind of like is no, it is.
It literally just started.
But even so, even if you go past their professional league, right, you would know the eyes on their women's soccer team, who has been their soccer team is so successful. Their men's there are times I think they missed the last World Cup. This is 18, and we all know about the whole pay structure that went on. We'll touch on that another time. But these players here in the US are so much more known than their male counterparts, and yet that does not show up in terms of the eyes and interest in the women's soccer team. Then let's look at WNBA.
Sorry, when you said the eyes and interest in the women's soccer team, referring to the national team or the league, is the new league?
Both,
Because it definitely shows up for the national team
but then
when
the
you look
new
at
league,
jersey sales
and
and
again,
so forth.
it just
The
started.
women's jersey sales totally outnumber men's jersey sales and so forth.
So to that point, clearly there is a target audience there. But then let's shift it now to WNBA. Again, their stars are very, very well known. Like, Diana Taurasi is a household name here in the US. And you could go on Sue Bird. Now we know of Brittney Griner, partly because of the situation in Russia. I don't want to put it on the fact that they are not marketed well because, again, maybe I am a bad example because I know these players through and throughout, and somebody like Liz Cambage, she even models outside of playing basketball. But they have struggled, and I mean the WNBA has struggled in terms of getting not just viewership, but people into the stands, as well as I think their stars are marketed. I don't know, y'all would have to tell me if y'all feel that same way. But I know these stars top to bottom. I know these stars throughout their entire teams. And it seems strange, like, for whatever it's worth, they just can't get people into the stands. They can't get the viewership that they want, to the point that as low as salary is and as low as we've seen, the I don't want to say income, what's the other, the money that's spent, the WNBA is still operating at a loss. And I don't know, sorry, the numbers would suggest to me that they have not found a target audience if there is one. And I've had some arguments. You and I, Marsha, this is how this episode started, because we had this argument. I don't know if there is that target audience because, quite frankly, the WNBA has been around for 30 years or 20-something odd
And
years.
that's not a lot of time. In sporting terms, the Barbados Football Association was founded in 1901.
Well, that's a bad.
I mean, if we want
to,
no, but I'm just saying, in Little Barbados, the Football Association was established in 1901. So to have a professional league established in 1996 from scratch in a predominantly male-dominated sport, I mean, come on.
But
and again, you're saying they're not getting the
terrible. Let's use
I was just using in terms of the age of existence. And you're saying, they're not getting the viewership that they want. But again, I think we need to be very cautious in how we interpret, because at the end of the day, they've been consistently seeing increases in viewership over the last 3 seasons. So with a consistent measured increase, how can we then say they are not getting the viewership they want? Yes, it could always be better. But between 2020 and 2021, there was a 63% increase.
I am with
for
you.
me, we can't overlook that.
I agree.
Growth, Marsha. But again, these are not just my words. If you hear the commissioner, they have identified that finding a target audience is a problem. And I don't know if there is one or if it's a problem that they are not marketing it to the right people. It is an issue, though. That is clear.
For me, I guess putting on my academic hat, the solution to that problem lies in research.
Yep.
And while, there's a lot of research in the US environment, there needs to be more targeted research in terms of viewership, viewer patterns in the WNBA, because sometimes without the numbers, the situation might look a lot worse than it really is. And we might be saying, hey, this is not the case, this is not the case. But it might be a situation where the typical WNBA fan, the characteristics of a WNBA fan might not be the traditional go to a venue watch. It might be, I will stream every single game that plays. So we still need to be careful, how we contextualize things, because viewership patterns have changed. Sport consumption in general has changed. For example, research shows that more people, I shouldn't say most, are consuming sport content via their mobile device. So then if we're using traditional television metrics and numbers as the be all and end all, then we're undervaluing the product. So definitely more research and contextualization, because the modern WNBA fan might be, let's say, if they're a Gen Z, then that is mobile 100%. That is not traditional media. So hopefully we'll do some digging in the future and we can, analyze those numbers and really see what the real situation is, because it might not be as bad as we think it is. And then I also like to say, sometimes we need to adjust what success looks like for each individual product, because success in the NBA context might not be success in the WNBA context. And by trying to put them in that mold, then you make it seem as if the product is bad when it really isn't bad. It is a different type of product when we're talking about sports products. But that would just be my 2 cents there. So then, touching on the track and field point that Justin, you were getting into, how can some of these entities grow their fan bases using, the Olympic Games, the 2020 Olympic Games held in 2021 in Tokyo as an example, as it related to performance? The women dominated not only in track and field, in swimming, in other sports. The women really turned up in Tokyo and showed out. And based on social media buzz and metrics and stuff, women really dominated the talking point. So then, how can sporting leagues, sporting teams, sporting organizations build on this kind of exposure to grow their individual fan bases?
It's all about, I hate to say this because I hate it myself, but it's really all about hype and building star players when you are here in the US. That is what the US loves.
It's for its fans. At the end of the day, nobody gets up one morning and say, "Oh, I don't know." You are drawn to sport for the players. You're drawn to sport for the fans.
And that's one thing I give American sport more than anything else. Like, they have a way, they know how to market stars, whether it be through commercial, be through it, whatever endorsement opportunities. They push faces. They push. It is more here. It is more about players more so than the team itself, and especially with I'm surprised in terms of track and field that you need to push these individual stars. And I think what has really started for me personally helped in terms of that women's 100-meter field, it is no Sha'Carri versus everyone else, and I absolutely love it. I eating it up. I love it. Like, the battle, the rivalry she has with the Jamaicans, I absolutely love that. And then now you're seeing the spill off between Pocket Rocket and who I think now is arguably, the greatest female sprinter of all time now, Elaine Thompson. These individual rivalries, these, pushing star products or pushing stars, that's the way forward, because that is how people are consuming things. It is not by accident that you buy a Ford or you buy Subway when you sit down and see Tom Brady. He doesn't even eat bread, but he's holding a Subway sub in his hand, or Steph Curry pushing this, or you attach your brand to LeBron James. That's how it has to go. That you have to market these individual stars, and as Rosheika spoke about earlier, show how good these individual athletes really, really are. Even if you are not looking at it at a team perspective, all about the stars.
And Justin, just to jump in here quickly, for me, listening to you talk, it really shows the power of the media and the role the media have to play in visibility and promoting female sport. Because you speak of a rivalry that technically doesn't exist,
Yeah, it doesn't.
but because it has set up that way,
Right.
it has been set up that way in the media, particularly American media. We now refer to this as a rivalry, but realistically, that isn't a rivalry.
Well, right,
And
because obviously
speaking as maybe someone might say I'm a biased sports fan, but a rivalry is established based on head-to-head, etc., etc. That rivalry does not exist outside of the media. So that same framing and promotion placed in other areas can help to set up other female sports with the level of prominence needed to attract those peripheral fans and attract those sponsors and so forth. So the media really has a role to play, and again, that cycle, media, fan, organization, and it just keeps going around, going around, going around.
Agreed.
I think rivalry does exist, though, in terms of, if you're meaning rivalry in terms of its primary form, obviously Sha'Carri has not beaten anybody, so it is not a rivalry in that sense.
Even in terms of the number of times they've actually run against each other, it's only
small.
one time.
But the reality is, as few occasions that they have actually shared lanes together, the reality is
one time.
The reality is
when the head-to-head was being pitted, they had never clashed on a track.
The reality is,
so the one time they ran was that post-Olympics meet.
But as you see, even their battles on social media, it is a rivalry. Whether how many times they've run or not against each other, the reality is there's no love lost on either side. And you've seen Shelly-Ann Fraser clap back. You've seen what Sha'Carri Richardson has said, not just on her own social media, but what you've seen she said in interviews and reports. It is clear these two sides, there is let me phrase this properly. Let us say there's no love lost between these two sides, and that is why I will term it as a rivalry because they don't like each other.
Fair enough. I'm just saying, a lot of it was
Yeah, it
manufactured
is.
via the media, via social media. So now it becomes front of mind.
I love it though.
And therefore the media can play a role there. But then going back then, focusing in on fan base. Sometimes I see the female fan now as a real overlooked slash untapped market segment. You're seeing it changing. Like, for example, the new Arsenal football kit for the women's team is relatively stylish because, traditionally the women's football kit used to be the men's football kit in smaller sizes, but we're moving away from that and creating dedicated apparel and so forth to appeal to the female fan. There was a recent collaboration with the NBA and makeup company ColourPop where they had eyeshadow palettes specifically for each franchise. So you could buy a Boston Celtics eyeshadow palette, LA Lakers, Miami Heat, etc. And the colors in the palette were reflective of the franchise color scheme and so forth. And for me, we need a lot more of that. I'm a Boston Celtics fan. Green is not my color for makeup, but by virtue of being a Boston Celtics fan, I will buy the green Boston Celtics palette. And we already know that females in general are consumers. Female sports fans are no different. So just to give you some other numbers now before we dig deeper into this topic. A recent global survey was published in December 2020 by Altman Salon, covering 16 different countries, about 18,000 respondents. 50% of women surveyed were monthly viewers of sport. When we focused on the Latin American and Asian region, that number rose to 70% of women. A recent study done by New York University showed that for the most lucrative North American professional leagues, so the NHL, MLS, NBA, NBL, the NFL, and NASCAR, female fans accounted for up to 45% of the total market, while women purchased 46% of NFL merchandise. That's nearly half of the NFL merchandise purchases, which is a lot of money coming from females. Added to that, 80% of females bought sport apparel and 60% of females spent money on men's clothing, as in sport apparel for their male counterparts, whether it's husbands, brothers, sons, friends, fathers, etc. So when we really look at the numbers and we're talking, sometimes it all comes down to the dollar. Is this segment of the female fan really an untapped segment or an overlooked segment or an undervalued segment?
I'll let you go.
Justin, you can go. You can jump in. Okay, well, Rosheika, you can go ahead.
I do think it's untapped. There has been a lot of development, especially in the last 3 to 5 years, in terms of marketing and factoring in the female fan by sporting organizations, national governing bodies, etc. And you see it, of course, in the examples that you shared, in types of products that they're putting forward. I've always bought the men's shirts because when I buy the women's shirts, they don't fit as well. You can tell that they're, in terms of the science behind putting together the women's jerseys, that they don't factor in that women's bodies are so different from male bodies, etc.
I'm going to jump in here and say that might be a Chelsea flaw because at Manchester United, we don't have that problem. I always buy the female jersey, but you can continue.
And in terms of sporting products, in terms of jerseys and even shorts, etc., there isn't as much thought. Before there wasn't as much thought put into making the product appeal more to women, making the product fit for the women's body types, as much thought now. But no, I believe that there is a more concerted effort. I mean, for the NFL, when you look on the websites for these different teams, you see that they are really trying to reach that market. Why? Because the research shows that women are roughly half of the demographic watching NFL every week now. So now
and they spend money.
So now they're trying to reach that market because they realize, wait, they're there. What needs to be done in sports, especially sports marketing, is not necessarily wait on the market to come to us, but to go to the market itself. I have a lot of my female friends have zero interest in sports, but they all have boyfriends, and they will, if they found a jersey attractive for their boyfriend's team, they would buy it, because if I think it looks pretty, then I'm going to buy it. But if you look at the jersey and you're like, ugh, it looks like the same one from last year, then that market will continue to be untapped. And then you have genuine sports fans like yourself, myself, and you, Marsha, that we really like sports. But of course, we're still women. We still like pretty things, and so the market there is a big effort in terms of in America, but I don't think in Europe it's grown as much yet, because of course they look at things very differently. They're very conservative. So like the makeup necessarily wouldn't work here because they tend to wear a specific look in Europe. But there are so many other things that can reach the female market if there is one, research done, and two, just when in the boardroom, if there's diversity, we will always, and I always say to people, like when people say that there needs to be diversity, we think that we just want a woman on the board. No, when you have a diverse decision making, then it won't be just one tenet. There will be so many other ways that are explored. Because if a jersey is being made and I'm like, okay, we're going up to XL, there are women with bigger busts. Things that a man won't necessarily think of. That it's really simple in terms of, one, it's research, proactive marketing, and also diversified decision making in terms of who do we want to appeal to in terms of our products that we consume outside of the sporting aspect, the entertainment value. Who do we want to market to, and how do we market to them?
For me personally, I don't really want to touch on the topic because I don't feel like I'm in a position to argue that in terms, because I don't buy female products, obviously. I will say, like what Rosheika says, though, from my male perspective, I find that the NFL and the MLB, oddly enough, actually do cater towards female products. Because, as I said, like if I'm on the Packers website, like I have to make sure to cut out certain, like to go into the bars and take out or put specifically male, because half of it will be female products. And I can tell you, like when I'm in stores, whether it be Shields or Kohl's or Nike, I always complain to my wife and say, Gina, the sporting products that are marketed towards you are always better in my eyes than what we get, especially when it comes to shoes. I swear to y'all that y'all get the best colorways in terms of Nikes. I swear, like I get so upset. The other day we were seeing these new Air Max, and I'm like, why can I not get this colorway as a man? Like, why are y'all getting all the best? And so it feels, from my perspective, in terms of American sports at least, that they have found a way to make sure to cater to their female fans. And as y'all said, it's because research has shown that it's almost 50% no. Like you go in an NFL stadium, you will see it's no longer just men. Like I can tell you this personally. If a man is there, his wife, his girlfriend is there with him, female children. My wife can tell you, like from her teenage years, she started going to Packer games as a girl because she felt, I don't know whether included is the word they want to use, but she did feel included. And then, oddly enough,
and that's tantamount to sport. Sport has that social element, and that's one of the things that makes it a very unique product. There is that social facilitation, that social interaction. There are some that will argue that sport does not exist without that layer of social facilitation.
No doubt about that. And then if you go to baseball game or football that caters to tailgating, no longer are you seeing a situation where it's just men drinking beers and frying brats and burgers. They are like the family is a family event now. And then when you look at the NFL and their marketing campaign as it comes across with breast cancer awareness of breast cancer month, like they target that audience. So I feel, from at least an American sport perspective, they have tapped into the female market in terms of selling their products. Again, I will leave. I don't buy them, so I would have to give away to y'all in terms of that. But it does feel that way in American sports here.
Well, for me, I would say that I agree that a lot more has happened in terms of the targeted marketing to females, but I also believe that a lot more needs to be done because sometimes in a lot of the marketing material, the commercials and stuff, sometimes there's still that underpinning
Oh,
of, and you kind of mention it, the female fan who doesn't really know anything. You're there because of the husband, because of the boyfriend, etc., without seeing the female fan who is interested in sport as a key cog in the market segment in itself. So I also want to see more
well, you,
dedicated, or I should say, product offerings, and not only physical product offerings like jerseys, etc., but even in terms of on game night, etc., things that are catered more. So not just the female version of the male thing. That's what I want to
agree.
get away from and have uniquely created, the same way you would necessarily, let's say, create a unique product or offering or experience for children, for argument's sake. Have things that are uniquely created for the female fan. I remember when I was at Pan Am Games in Peru, one of the sponsors was like a distributor, and one of their major brands was a shampoo company. And they had this whole setup, on-site activation, where you could go as a male. Yeah, it was a male shampoo, get your hair washed and cut on site at the event. It was at the baseball venue, etc. And that type of creative activation, I would like to see, not just okay, take a product, put some pink on it, and say, hey, we're catering to female fans, because yeah, the pink tax, that's a whole other discussion altogether. But I really want to see, more creativity and more
I
more
I get
more
you.
interest in terms of, yes,
But
tapping
why that's
heavily into
important,
that
Marsha,
market.
is to note that I think a lot of times people tend to think that a smaller percentage of female sports fans are actually serious sports fans. But you
Yeah.
have casual female sports fans and a lot of casual male sports fans. I have
Ex-
I have
and
I
yeah,
have friends that buy jerseys every year, and they probably watch like quarter of the games. It's a part of being a community. That's what sport does. And so I agree with you in terms of it doesn't need to be as gender specific, because there are casual fans on both in both genders.
on both
Yeah,
sides.
so
Yep.
you have to think about that part too. Like, we can't just say, oh, women come to hang out. Or in my in my marketing class a few months ago, they had an ad, and this ad was produced just 5 years ago, and it was basically showing women at baseball. It was marketing hot dogs, and it was basically showing the women just buying food. It was like they were just like the ultimate casual fan, and I'm like, did nobody like look at this ad and think how sexy it is? There are men that go to baseball to just drink beer too.
Yep.
It's not as different as we like to think. They are both sides.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Justin, you wanted to jump in
No, I
here?
was just learning a little anecdote in terms of your mentioning pink. Because I do every time we go in the Packers Pro Shop, my wife would say, oh geez, on like, yes, I want something female specific, but don't make it female specific by just throwing pink on it and call it female stuff.
Yep.
I just found it so funny that y'all mentioned that because I constantly hear that.
Yeah. Because for some people, that is what catering to females
Yes.
equate to. And that's the point I want to make. I want us to move away from that and have, we're in a creative age, something innovative to help capture the female fan or capture the new female fan, that female fan between 15 to 18 or 14 to 21 who's now looking to get into sport. Things to capture their attention, and not the just typical slap pink on things. So then, guys, Rosheika, you mentioned diversity, and that's going to lead me right into our next point, where diversity at the boardroom level, diversity at the C-suite will have an impact on so many areas, none more so than women's sport. So as it relates to areas like coaching, administration, even ownership, we are seeing some changes in terms of the trend. So to just give you some more context here, for example, the football competition that Justin mentioned, the National Women's Soccer League in the US, the NWSL, a new league. But one of the things I like about the NWSL is that they've been really pioneering in terms of the diversity of the ownership group. We've had more female owners and co-owners for a professional league than we've had in any of the other major US leagues. So, and you're having some big names, Serena Williams, Natalie Portman, Jennifer Gardner, etc. So there's lots of, you're seeing more diversity in the ownership group. And it is almost reflective of the ethos of the competition itself. Then from an executive level, most recently the Boston Celtics hired Allison, her last name is slipping me right now, as the VP of Player Development and Organizational Growth. She came on in 2022. You're seeing, more women moving up to that C-suite level. Do you think that this is a trend that will continue?
I definitely think so. When you look at the figures in terms of sports and sport executives in terms of women, whether it's in media, in sports administration itself, or working within these bigger franchises, the numbers were dismal up until probably like 10 years ago. The world becoming more woke has done a lot of favor to women in sports, thankfully. And a big part of that is women are no longer uncomfortable about speaking about the uncomfortable aspects of women in sports. Before, we just wanted to be able to watch freely or participate freely, but we've realized that's not enough. I say it all the time in class. I get that this may not be fun to hear, but men have controlled a lot of sports for a very long time, and that has hampered sports in so many ways. It has fostered corruption. It has hampered, that stalled development across sports in so many ways, in terms of women's sports growing, women's issues being addressed in terms of safe sports, because there isn't diversity. And so at some point, thankfully, it's moved from persons just having these quiet discussions amongst each other to, in America, where the gymnasts all came out and spoke out against the doctor. In UK, there have been several series of incidents of reckoning where people have been speaking about their experiences, where where men have violated the position of trust. It's important, those uncomfortable conversations, and I don't think those revelations have ended. There's so much different forms of harm and abuse happening in sports that has been facilitated by men controlling sports, which has facilitated the culture of silence. Diversification is happening, but there's so much more to be done. It has to be where the conversation cannot stop, and I think that's what will aid more women being involved, with NFL saying as of it's next season where women they're included women in oh my gosh, I've spoken about this so many in class, so I'm not remembering its name now. What's the action to get black coaches?
Rooney Rule.
Rooney Rule. I've written about Rooney Rule so many times. I don't know if it wants to come to me, but it has to move from just pretty posters March 8th every year to actively trying to include gender parity in decision making in terms of executives, in terms of coaches. I'm honestly so exhausted when I see first woman coach, the first female referee. It grinds my gears because you look back, and especially like in the Caribbean, there's so many pioneers of sports were women, and we're still having so many firsts. That tells you that though they have been a big part of development of sports, they've always been shoved to the side when it comes to decision making, when it comes to actually getting power to be able to move sports forward. And so it has to be mediums like this. A medium like this is important, using all these forums to put these issues at the forefront and not let it be, I think that's only discussed once a year, but a constant conversation. When I go to classes or I go to sport conferences here, a big part of what I ask these panelists about is, you're successful in sports now, as a man or a woman. How are you helping to bridge the gap between men and the women that want to be involved in sports and the men that are already there. Because it's a case of a lot of persons, they are comfortable like saying, okay, I'm the first woman to be on this executive board, but you have to bring up other women with you, or when you leave, you'll be the first woman for 30 years. And it's about like me, Dawson, when during the podcast, Dawson always ensured we had every other episode we had a woman on. That's a part of raising visibility of the fact that women are involved in sports. We may not know it, but it's important that they no longer be in the background anymore. They have to be front and center, speaking about the issues and also making the decisions.
Justin, what about you? Do you think this is a trend that we're going to see continue?
It depends on the sport. Sorry, quite honestly, it really depends on the sport. And there is it's no coincidence that things are different depending on the actual league. We talk about this all the time. The NBA itself is more forward thinking than most of the other American leagues. So it is not a surprise when you see somebody like Becky Hammond was a lead assistant on the Spurs and was an actual candidate for a head coaching job, the opening at the Portland Trail Blazers. Whether she was just put there as to seen as a female candidate or not, the fact of the matter is she was a finalist for the job. You are not going to see that among a lot of other a lot of other, sporting organizations.
Leagues and so forth.
So let's take, for instance, the NFL. Let's talk frankly. We know they do things for show. There are about 4 female coaches, assistant or whatever position coaches within the NFL now. I think there's one in the Buccaneers, one in the Raiders, and there are 2 more that are not coming. Oh, one for the San Francisco 49ers for sure, and there's one other that I'm missing. And now you're seeing on-field refs. But let's delve deeper into the numbers. This league is made up of at least 70% black players, and there are only 3 black head coaches across the league. 1 or 2 black general managers, no black owners. So if you're doing that with black men, you know for a fact that females are not going to be representative in the sport. They are not going to be represented at all. Like, they will do whatever it takes to appeal to the masses. So we're going to get close. At one point, I expect to see an all-female referee crew so they can appeal to the female market and say, oh, look, what we're doing. And then they will have some more positioned female coaches. But that's as far as it's going to go in the NFL, because we know the NFL is controlled by rich white men, and rich white men will always serve the interests of rich white men. That's the reality of the situation. I expect this trend to go through other sports. I'm glad to see, especially in the WNBA, there's female ownership. As you talked about in this new professional women's soccer league, there is female ownership, and especially star-driven female ownership. So, there is visibility to that league. Even Major League Baseball, which has been stuck to its traditions for so long, a culturally relevant place like the New York Yankees, they have a female position coach in their minor league system now, and I only expect that to grow now. The name is excluding me, but I know there was a team who made a big splash by hiring a female, either like a CEO or president, very high up the ladder. My mind wants to tell me somebody like the Seattle Mariners. I know it's a team out west, but they have a very high-ranking female official right now, whether general manager or president or something like that. And I suspect because baseball is trailing the NBA and NFL popularity and viewership, you're going to see more inclusion where that league is concerned. But this trend is going to stop where it concerns particular leagues. You're going to see the forward-thinking leagues continue to have more female inclusion. The reality is the NFL, which is the king of them here in America, because their product is so vastly watched without inclusion, they have no impetus to change it. We can talk about the Rooney Rule. We can adjust that every single year to do that. You can have Brian Flores suing them all you want. The reality is the consumer eats this product at high rates and it's increasing every single year. The inclusion is not improving. So why do they have any impetus to change? And so, sorry to hammer home this point, the trend is going in the right direction for other leagues, but there's one in particular that will not change.
I mean,
Oh,
it's owned by old white men who paid Deshaun Watson millions of dollars. Yeah, I think a big part of that, I agree with you regarding NFL. So funny thing that in January I wrote a paper about the Rooney Rule, and I put in it that the Rooney Rule, though they have a lot of people think it's so successful, that it's one of the worst policies that have been put into sports because of how surface it is. And then I submitted the paper, and about less than a week later, Brian Flores did the lawsuit, and because I had a massive debate, with a few friends about. They were saying that the Rooney Rule has been successful, and as an academic, I was saying no, it's absolutely not. It's not. But I think the media has a lot to do with the framing and what will push the NFL to move beyond where it is. The media it's two things: the media and their audience. If their audience starts
and the fan base.
if their fan base starts reacting negatively towards these things that they're doing, then they will be forced to. But the truth is that the NFL has gotten away with so much. I mean, the Deshaun Watson thing will forever be. I find it hard. I was not a big NFL fan until a few years ago, but these are some of the things that I used to see that used to make me not be interested in the sport, because it's easily one of the most sexy sports in terms of how they deal with issues to do with gender. And I'm honestly flabbergasted that in 2022 they are so far behind the rest of the world. Like, I don't even think they're in the 90s yet. Honestly, I don't think they're in the 90s yet.
And for me, as it relates to, increases in women in ownership, in executive level, or in coaching, I see sport is really a microcosm of society. And we already know that generally in society, women are still trying to make those strides in these areas, in business, etc. So sport is going to reflect that. Hopefully, as it relates to sport, it won't take as much time as it took for other areas like business and so forth for women to catch up. And unlike Rosheika, my nerves don't grind when I hear, the first women or first female to do this. For me, I'm like, okay, cool, we got one, so now let the doors open. Because I am also a proponent of, you have to see it to be it. And once you can see people, acting in certain positions, filling certain roles, doing certain things, then automatically it opens the mind's eye to other people. Like, hold on, I never thought about females being referees in the NFL. I like NFL. I know the rules. This is something. So sometimes you got to see it to be it. So I'm always
why I
happy
have an issue with it is, especially in American context, is women there've been so many surface developments that are supposed to impact it. So like for me, there've been a lot of promotions around Title IX across the different sports this year. I want to not just hear that Title IX has enabled millions of women to participate in sports, but I want to hear, okay, how are we going to ensure that the next 50 years is better for women in sports, instead of us harping on the fact that this is the first woman referee, because it's surface. And I think that's what a lot of the solutions that have been brought forward for women in sports have been surface. And I think that's why it irritates me so much. I want it to be more than surface. I want to see, okay, this is the first all women's team, but we are putting together a program at the collegiate or high school level for women for girls that are interested in sports but don't want to play any further, to get to learn about about refereeing, etc. Things like that is what I would love to see more of, instead of us just the media and also these organizations just focusing on the fact that this is the first, but what are we going to do about the second and third, or will she be the first for 20 years?
First and only.
Yeah.
And definitely a lot of change lies at the policy level, whether we like it or not, whether the organizational policy, the franchise policy, the league policy, like there has to be a very concerted strategic effort to expose females, like for example in the WNBA, there's a women in business leadership
Yes.
program where they develop and train female leaders, not only specific to basketball, but across the board. And that is the kind of policy implementation and strategic approach we really need to see going forward for any change to continue. So guys, then as we move quickly toward the end, I'm going to come make this a double barrel question. You know, the traditional journalists will tell you don't ask double barrel questions, but I'm going to stick the two together. Given everything that we've said, you know, some of the changes, some of the trends as it relates to viewership, coverage, ownership, the executive level, etc., what impact does this have for the players themselves, and what will that mean for the future of women's sport?
Go ahead, Rosheika. You're the guest, so usually we let the guests go right ahead.
What impact can it have on the players themselves? It gives them agency. So in women being represented more, and also women seeming believing that their interests are being factored in decision making, it gives them agency. The lawsuit that Megan and the rest of the women's football team brought
US. Mm-hmm.
against their the USFA. Oh, like, I'm pretty sure it's not USFA, but anyways,
The Soccer Federation.
yeah, the Soccer Federation.
Right.
That results is because of agency. They believe they have agency, and they believe that they're aware of the facts that they were being paid less than their male counterparts, though they were more successful. So they in just in the fact that they were so successful, they believe they had agency, and in having agency, they decided to go forward and to fight for what they believe was their right. And so I think that's a big part of what these trends are important, because players, though they may not be center to all of the conversations about women in sports, in the conversation becoming more normalized, they will believe they will have agency. And I think that's why we have all these revelations of abuses by coaches and other stakeholders in sports, because we do believe we have more agency now. The culture of silence is no longer enough. And I think that's how it will benefit players themselves, because they do, if players are no longer waiting to leave a sport 10 years before they talk about the horrible things that they face in the sport. That's new. And that's because they believe that in telling their story, change can happen. So that's a big way I think that is has impacted. I don't remember the last part of your question.
That's why you don't ask double barrel questions.
So then, okay, I'll split it then. So Justin, you can tell me what impact you think it will have on the players, and then we're going to tackle the future.
That's why you bring academics, because they give you the terms they want to use. Because I agree, I just didn't know the word they wanted to use. And it's agency. She's correct. I feel empowered when the people I'm going to look like me, are me. Like, I am not going to feel comfortable talking about a situation that impacts me with somebody who does not understand my struggle. So I can go to a female owner and say, this is my situation, because she can understand, because she, like me, is female. I'm not female, obviously, but you know what I mean. Like, it goes back to representation, inclusion. We talk about this all the time. How can I feel comfortable in my work setting when the person I'm going to, the person above me, does not want to see things from my perspective, does not want to include me, does not try to be sympathetic to what is going on with me. And thankfully, Rosheika went before me because she used the word agency. That is what it's all about, like the reality situation.
Stick with us, you'll learn a lot.
True.
I'm smart enough to know that smarter people talk and go before me. But the reality situation, this is why we talk about inclusion, not just of females, but in terms of race as well. It all comes back to, how am I going to feel comfortable when I am the workforce, the labor force? I embody the entire labor force, and then management does not look like me, is not me. It can't ever work. Like, that's not going to work. Like, let's call it what it is. Like, this is almost going back to whatever we want to go back to sexist times, where slavery, when it comes to race. It cannot work. And this is why the need for inclusion. Like, if I have a body of female athletes, let us take, for instance, the WNBA. Like, a female coach they are going to feel more comfortable in certain situations talking to a female coach. They're going to feel comfortable seeking change in talking to a female owner, a female CEO, a female executive. That is reality situation. We can't on one hand sit down and argue for racial equality and sit down and say, oh, the NBA and the NFL, that 70% labor force is black. We need black ownership and black coaching, black executives, and then sit down and turn a blind eye when it comes to females in sports. And then not just female sports, but females breaking into male sports, because I know a lot of us feel that the argument is, how would a woman understand what goes on in a male sport or male dominated sport? And we are finding out that is not the case. We've sat down and watched Major League Baseball of all sports. They had an all-female, I want to say, telecast. I think all the two, the two announcers and the on-field reporters were all female. And if you watch that telecast, there was no difference. Like, you did not feel any particular difference unless you were looking for it. Like, the baseball game went on as normal, and like you sit down and see, like, now Doris Burke is trying to pave a way for other female NBA announcers. I suspect, for me personally, I like when Doris is on because Doris is knowledgeable, and I hate NBA announcers who are not educating me, because that's part of it. I don't want just to be entertained, but I feel an announcer or an analyst is there to educate me, to tell me what I am looking at or what I should be looking for. So these are the things, as Rosheika quite eloquently put it, agency.
Well, then, guys, your 30-second wrap up. What can we look for, or what are you looking forward to for the future for women's sport?
For me, as a media person, definitely seeing more broadcasts focusing on giving prominence to women's sports, seeing more global organizations having brand ambassadors that are women in sports. There's so many brilliant women in sports that if you give them the opportunity, they will do your brand so much good. Diversification in all aspects of sports, not just at the executive level, but just facilitating more women being involved in sports, not just to play, but at all levels, and doing that from a very young age. You see the statistics about how many girls leave sports, participating in sports by age 15. There are so many reasons for that. So one of the things that I believe that's really important too is more research, not just focusing on women leadership, sports leadership and women, but diversifying the type of research that focuses on girls and women in sports, so that we can have actual statistics to make these decisions. So those are really the two big tenets. The media has a massive role. TV is still king. I mean, digital media has gotten a lot of prominence, but TV is still king. Using the media to raise awareness of the issues, drive visibility of the sports and these stars, and also to push for change. The media is so powerful, and I just wish we, in framing the different perspectives that we do every day, that we put that as a part of something that has to be constantly repeated, because that's the point. If we only speak about it once a year, everybody will say, okay, they'll forget it in a few weeks. And of course, research. There's so much that we don't know, and that's why we keep going around in that circle, because we don't know. If we don't know, then we can't make decisions. So Coca-Cola funds so much research at my school now. Having these big organizations also funding some research to it, women and girls in sports, is also critical. So that's the future that I see. We are still at the starting point, to be honest. And I feel like probably it won't be until the next generation that we won't be at the starting point, but it takes a lot of discussions like these, and also playing our own little part in keeping the conversation going and actually making change.
For me personally, it has to be, because I won't touch on the points where she made. So for me, I want to see more marketing, because everything in this world is marketing. When you put a spotlight on something, when you push something, you get viewers or you get people to consume it. And like the product could be as bad as ever. We know this. When you market something heavily, people will consume that product. And I would love to see more, especially here in the US, more of these female stars across all these sports. As you know, the NBA is my basketball, is my love. So I would love more WNBA athletes being pushed because they are so good, they're so skilled. I would love them to be, because they're marketable. So I don't want to be saying they're more, for them to be more marketable. I want them to be marketed even more. And the reality is inclusion at policymaking level, Marsha. You always say this. Nothing changes unless it starts with policy. So you are going to need more women in the boardrooms, more women at the executive level, because that's where it's all going to change. And thankfully, I'm seeing that in Major League Baseball. Thankfully, I'm seeing that at NBA level. Like the unfortunate situation, the king of all sports here will never. I'm going to say this. I don't think it's ever going to get there because we already know who owns and controls this. But you need women at the policy-making level, and not just to steer it in a situation to benefit just them, but you have, more inclusion. Like, so you have a broader perspective. It is what we did like at the Nation. On Sundays, you see there's something called the Writers' Round Table. And the reason you do that is because when you have 4 different writers attacking one point, you get a broader perspective and get everyone's perspective, and know you have a better understanding of what is going on. Situation. So not just with women, but you want minorities. Like you just need inclusion at the policy making level.
Well, thank you guys as we wrap up this edition of This Just In. Hopefully we'll reach a stage where we won't need a dedicated show, to talk about women in sport, because it would all just be sport. It would just be, another episode. But until then, we acknowledge that as female sport, plays catch up and we're seeing various trends and we're seeing various changes, we as sports fans can do our part through consumption and so forth. And because sport is male dominated, many of these changes can't happen without male champions. So for those of you watching, you're a fan of the NFL, you're a fan of the NBA, you're a fan of the MLS, spend some time, couple minutes, if you are not already watching the WNBA, watching the WNSL, watching the Women's Premier League, lend your eyes to the coverage as well as we seek to change these trends and patterns of consumption and support for women's sport. For us here at This Just In, remember you can find us on social media platforms. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. Be sure to like this video. Just hit the like button now. Yes, go ahead, like the video.
YouTube.
And if you aren't subscribed already, you should be subscribed. But if you aren't subscribed already, please ensure that you subscribe and turn on your post notifications so you won't miss an episode. I'm Marsha Boyce, and that's it for this edition of This Just In.
I don't have a mark on my face, and I upset Johnny Liston, and I just turned 22 years old. I must be the greatest. I told the world, I talk to God every day. If God's with me, ain't nobody here just the same. I shook up the world. I shook up the world. I shook up the world. I shook up the world.
I said, can I be a legend? Search your soul and answer me this question. Do you think I have what it takes to be great, but still be humble and learn from my mistakes? Shit.